Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to create a simple package for Laravel. It'll essentially be a wrapper for an external API, but you'll learn how to structure a basic package, use Guzzle to make calls to an API, and install your package locally with Composer. I've gone ahead and created a local Laravel project using a simple Docker Compose script, which I've linked in the description below. The service we're building this package for is a site called Quick Metrics that recently launched. I noticed that they didn't have any PHP or Laravel libraries on their site, but they did use some simple curl requests, so I figured this would be a great opportunity to build a handy little wrapper for it. If we hop on over to the documentation, you'll see that the endpoint we need to send our data to is qckm.io/json, and that a name and value are required. Dimension is an optional string that we can pass in. We'll also need to include an xqm key header with an API key. Let's switch back over to our project. Our end goal is to have something like a quick metrics event or QM event method that we can use throughout our Laravel application. I'm going to make a directory tree under packages just following typical naming convention, and we'll name it ashmelian/quickmetrics-laravel. Let's cd inside of it, and we'll initialize Composer. Add in a few details like the name, description, author, and everything else we'll be adding in down the road. Now that that's finished up, we need to create a service provider under an src directory. This and the Composer file is all that's needed for Laravel to recognize and use this package. Keep that blank for now and head back over to our composer.json file. We'll have to add in some autoload information so that Laravel will register the paths under our source directory as ashmelian/quickmetrics. Under the Extra and Laravel headings, a providers array tells our app about the main service provider, which Laravel uses to discover packages installed. This prevents us from having to add anything into the providers array after Laravel 5.5. Let's head back into our service provider and start scaffolding it out. We're using the namespace that matches what we just added into the composer.json file, ashmelian/quickmetrics. And we'll also be adding in a use statement for Illuminate Support Service Provider. Our class name matches the file name and extends the service provider. In Laravel's service provider classes, there are two commonly used methods, boot and register. Boot is fired after everything on the application, including third-party libraries, have been loaded up. You can use this method to bootstrap any web services, add event listeners across your application, or publish configuration and database migrations. Register is great for extending functionality to your current service provider class before your application is ready, like through singletons or additional service providers. Let's add in a DD to our boot method just to see if our package works. If we go back and refresh the page, we'll see that nothing has changed. Why is that? Well, we have the package structure set up correctly, but we haven't actually installed it into our main Laravel app. We can easily do this through Composer, and the best part is that we won't have to do this once. Any change that we make to our package afterwards will be instantly available to the root application. Go ahead and open the main Composer.json file in our parent Laravel project. Under the keywords array, we're going to add in a repositories object. It'll just need a single key, which is going to be the conventional name that we've decided for our project, quickmetrics-laravel. That will be the key to another object, which will set the type property of to path, the URL property to our local path, and an options object with a single property called symlink that's set to true. What Composer is actually going to do is override the usual packages request, and instead searching our URL locally and symlinking the package to the vendor's directory if it's found. The only other thing to do is add in our package name to the require object and set the version to @dev. If we run Composer update from our application root directory, our local package gets installed, which we can verify by checking the vendor directory. Going back to our web browser and refreshing, our DD that we added in earlier is now showing up, proving that our package has been installed and has been integrated successfully. Now it's time that we add in some of our desired functionality. Remember earlier that our end goal is to have a QuickMetrics event method, and in order to accomplish that, let's create a separate QuickMetrics class in our package's source directory. Opening it up, we'll just set up some quick scaffolding with a namespace, class name, and a public static function called event. Now because we're using PHP 7.2 in this example, I like type pending our method's parameters. Going back to the QuickMetrics documentation, I can see that name is a string, value is a number, or a float since it looks like it can have decimal values, and dimension is a string as well. Dimension is optional though, so a question mark in front of the string type means that it can be a string or null, and we're going to set that default value to null. Back on our service provider in our register method, we're going to set up a singleton that returns our QuickMetrics class from earlier, ensuring that only one instantiation is up at a time. To test this out, I'm going to just add in a quick return of the arguments that we passed through and create a new route that we can visit to get those values shown in the browser. Metrics controller with a test method sounds nice. We'll set up the new test method and return our QuickMetrics event call with a couple of basic arguments. If we visit the new route in our browser, you can see that it's being returned just as expected. At this point, we can move to actually calling the external API. Hands down, the best library for making any HTTP calls with PHP is Guzzle. It's powerful, easy to set up, and pretty simple to understand. We're going to be using it for a single post request, so hopefully it won't be that difficult to wrap your head around. In the command line, let's cd back to our package's root directory and require Guzzle through Composer. The reason that we're doing this in the package root is that Composer requirements are cascaded through the packages that it installs. This way, by installing our package, it includes both the classes we've built and anything else that our package requires as well, installed across the entire Laravel application. After that's finished up, we can go back to our QuickMetrics class, remove our test return, and add in the Guzzle use statements. We'll need both the main client library, as well as the exception in case things go wrong. Let's start off by creating a new client, passing in an options array with just a single key, base URI, set to qckm.io. This way, any calls made with this client just need to include the endpoint path. Next, in a try-catch block, we'll call a post request to the JSON endpoint per the QuickMetrics documentation, and in Guzzle, if we want to pass through JSON to the API, we include it as a value in an array with JSON as the key. The library will handle the appropriate server headers and content type. We also need to pass in our API key with the XQR key header, which we can add in through a headers array after the JSON key. We'll be catching a Guzzle exception, and we'll decide how to handle it later. Taking a small step back, let's create our JSON array using the values we're passing into our method. Name and value are required and will always be needed. Dimension, though, is optional and will only be included if the value is not null. Our client request call will return a Guzzle response object, and we'll use this to return back a simple JSON object that displays the response code and message from the server call. we'll return a similar object from the exception, the error message with a status of 500, internal server error. Because we've added a new external package to our package, we'll have to revisit the root of our Laravel application and run composer update once more to pull Guzzle in. Once that's finished, we can visit the /test route in our browser, refresh, and see something new. We're getting an error though because we haven't included the appropriate API key, but that does mean that Guzzle is calling the external server and returning the appropriate response. In order to fix that, let's visit the Quick Metrics dashboard, grab our API key, and add it into the appropriate header value in our event method. Going back to the browser and refreshing the page, we'll see a different result, a 204 code, and no response, which is exactly what we should be expecting from this API. We can verify that everything is working correctly by going back to Quick Metrics and seeing our value and metric name in the dashboard. There's one problem though. Hard-coding our API key into a package that we might plan on distributing later is probably not the best idea. We'll need to abstract that out of this package and into a per application basis. The best way to do this would be to create a configuration file that a user can edit and add their own values into. Let's cd back into our package directory and create a config folder with a single quickmetrics.php file. Configuration files in Laravel are pretty simple. It's just a PHP file that returns a single array. The array keys can then be referenced using a config helper in both packages and throughout your application. For this package, we're just going to add in a single item called key, where our API key will be held. Let's paste our API key in there and save the file. Navigating back to our package's service provider, in the boot method we can call publishes, which will copy over our config file from our package to the application when the vendor publish artisan command is used. This needs an array with a key value set, consisting of the file that you want to copy and the location that you'll be copying it to, respectively. We can then go back to our app's root directory and run the PHP artisan vendor publish command, selecting our package, and see that Laravel copies over our quickmetrics.php config file into the app's config directory. If you prefer even more abstraction, we can remove any default value and instead opt for using the env method helper, which will pull values from our env file. I'm going to go ahead and modify the quickmetrics.php config file in our package to use an env value, delete the previous copy in our application's config directory, and then run the vendor publish artisan command again. Once that's copied over, I can go into my application's env file and add in the API key with the header that I specified in the config file. The final piece of all this is that I need to reference that config file value in our package. Back in the quickmetrics class, we can replace the hard-coded API key with the config helper. In Laravel, values are pulled in by the config file name, followed by a period, and then followed by the key of the value that you're looking for. In our case, that translates to quickmetrics.key. Let's save that, go back to our browser, and refresh to make sure that everything is working correctly. Which it looks like it is. Another event has been recorded successfully and is up on the dashboard. Well, that's about it. You've learned how to structure a basic Laravel package, install it locally through Composer, call API endpoints using the external Guzzle package, and create a config file to pull in env values. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, feel free to leave them below, or you can let me know on Twitter. Thanks for watching.